Hey, Myles here at Tactical Hyve. Just got to the range for a practice session and thought about a common question we get, and that's how to train, how to practice, and even coming up with a program. So I thought it would be a great topic to cover in this video. So if you're interested, make sure to stay tuned. How to train and practice. It's such a common question that we get. Well, before we move on, wanted to thank Vetter Holsters for sponsoring today's video. If you guys are looking for a great quality holster at an affordable price, make sure to check out Vetter Holsters. We've been using them since the beginning. We use them in all of our Force and Force classes because they have a very wide selection of holsters, lots of different styles, and when we need something right away, we can get it from them. They ship very quickly, and check out their site. I mean, they have a bunch of different styles and holsters, as I mentioned. So if you guys are looking for a holster or two, make sure to check out Vetter Holsters. We'll leave a link below in the description. Now let's get back to the content. Okay, training and practice. Before we dive into what's a good program, what you should do on the range, let's cover some basics here. First off, training and practice are actually different. If I were to define both in a Cliff Notes manner, training is when you are learning new things, you are trying out new things, and it's where you make mistakes. So it's similar to going to an actual firearms training class, whereas practice is where you hone in and get your repetitions and master what you already know. So there's a difference between training and practice. Practice is what you want to do to really hone in those skills and build it, make it part of your subconscious. And training is, those things when you want to learn more or maybe when you hit a plateau. That being said, we're going to talk a little bit about both. And the way you approach both can be very, very similar. When it comes to the topic of how to train and how to practice, we've received that question a lot, as I already mentioned, but we haven't really talked about it because the truth is, there's so many different ways to approach training and practice. There isn't one way. And there's a lot of different factors that we have to consider and variables. For example, what's your skill level? What are you training for? There's a whole boatload of factors we have to consider. So in this specific video, we're going to be covering shooting. Okay? So we're not going to be talking about necessarily tactical training or any other type of defensive training. We're going to focus in on shooting. But what we're going to share are different elements or common denominators that you're going to run into or encounter in any training program that you have. When it comes to improving your shooting, you already have heard about dry fire, and that is the first topic I want to talk about before we dive into kind of how to approach an actual training program or a practice program. Dry fire is essential. As I mentioned, you've probably heard about that already, but sometimes people think they have to always shoot live fire. That isn't always the case. Now, if you have the opportunity to shoot live fire all the time, you have an unlimited budget, that's great. You absolutely can do that. And you are going to see tremendous gains. But is it required? You don't have to do that. A lot of professional shooters actually dry fire a lot more than they do live fire. And I will share with you something that happened to me personally. When I first started shooting, I just shot live fire. I shot, no joke, I shot about 1,000 rounds of practice session, anywhere from 3 to 5 times a week. This went on for a long time, and I actually got trigger finger. It's an actual condition. I had surgery for that because my finger would lock up, and that was because of a lot of the impact. And so there's a dual purpose here. Dry fire is very important because, one, it's free. You can do it anywhere, and you can pretty much practice everything you do live fire dry. You just don't have that recoil impulse. So it's cheaper. You can do it anywhere, and believe it or not, like what happened to me, there's a lot of impact that occurs from using live fire. So that's one thing you have to consider. So when you approach your dry fire, one thing a good way to think about this is that you want to use dry fire to work your skills. So if I'm working on the draw here, and I'm not going to explain, this is not a draw video, but let's just say I was working these mechanics here, and I'm doing this draw, number of times dry. This is exactly what you do live as well. So you don't need to shoot. So if you're working on the technique here and the mechanics, that's all you need to do. Now the next thing is you validate your dry fire training, this technique and what you're doing when you go live fire. So if I was working, let's just say I was working a push out technique. I'm bringing the gun up and pushing out, and I want to take a shot immediately when my gun is presented. And I do that maybe thousands of times, dry fire. Now I want to see if I'm actually doing it well with a live shot. Then you would add your ammo and then maybe time yourself, which we're going to get into, recording, journaling, things like that. and I might have a goal in mind. And from here, that's when I do live fire and I break the shot to see if everything is exactly where I want it to be, if I'm performing well, if my mechanics are good. So when you dry fire, the way to think about this, which might be helpful to you, is think about your dry fire as your training. Right? So this is, and even as your main practice. And all you got to do is use live fire to validate. If you are a beginner and you don't really have good control or understanding of recoil, then you do definitely need to shoot live fire a little bit more just to kind of understand that recoil impulse and get used to the force that's produced by that shot. Other than that, as I mentioned, dry fire is a great training and practice tool, and you do not need to go on the range to shoot live ammo to get better. To illustrate my point, let's say that I want to practice, we'll make things simple here. From compress ready, I want to practice being able to push my gun out and hit a target. In this case, we have a popper about 12 yards away. So I could do a lot of my practice, get those reps in, dry fire. So right now I'm dry, and I have a target about 12 yards away. And let's just say I have the target here, and all I'm going to do dry is focus on all the mechanics. Now remember, we're not going over technique right now, so I'm going to talk more about just the process of training and practice here. When I punch out, I'm doing this all dry. I want to, once my arms are extended, I'm breaking the shot. And I would do this as long, as many times until I feel very comfortable. So I'm doing this here, working on my trigger press, my presentation, my grip, everything. So once you feel you have it down pat, everything is perfect, your sights are working, or red dot are working exactly the way you want, this is where you now can go live fire to validate your dry fire. So now instead of doing thousands of these reps and wasting ammo, so that 1,000 rounds, do this 1,000 times, and then now you could possibly, so I'm gonna go live here, put on my eyes. So let's say we did 1,000 reps dry fire. Now let's just see if we can do this live. So I'm here, all right? I've done it up 1,000 times dry. Now I can do this and see if I can do it live. And if you are able to do this live, let's say 10, 20 times or however many times that you want to, you've already validated that your dry fire is working. And if for some reason your live fire shots are not working out the way you want to, then you have to evaluate. Is it because of your dry fire? Maybe you're doing things wrong, or is there something else that you need to look out for, which we're going to get into when we talk a little bit about video. The second point I want to discuss before we get into how to approach our training program is something that applies to any training or practice approach, and that is focus on quality over quantity. I already alluded to when I first started shooting, I focused on quantity. So I would go to my training session, remember live fire, I would shoot at least 1,000 rounds, and I thought no matter what I had to shoot 1,000 rounds. I honestly wish I can go back in time because I threw a lot of rounds, I wasted a lot of rounds. It was like doing work for work's sake, but not really understanding what was going on. And so what you want to do in your training and practice program is always focus on quality over quantity. It's not the number of reps, necessarily the number of reps you do, it's a number of quality reps that you do. When I train these days, I shoot about 250 to 300 rounds, whereas, as I already mentioned a couple times, I would used to shoot 1,000 rounds a day. My practice sessions are a little bit different. If you recall, practice is when we're trying to hone in those skills and make them, burn them into our subconscious. So if I'm training about 250 to 300 rounds, and this is when I'm just by myself and not at a class, my practice sessions, though, are when I do more reps, though. Practice sessions are about 500 to 1,000 rounds. That's if I'm doing live fire. But remember what I just discussed previously, you don't necessarily need to be shooting live fire all the time, right? If you have the means to, then go ahead, but dry fire is just as good. The third point that applies to any effective training program is to have goals. It could be, you could set micro goals per each training session, and then let's say mini goals where it is, let's say, goal for the month or goal for quarterly goal, and then maybe even yearly goals. But having those goals is extremely important for your training session so you have something to work towards. A lot of people, they go to the range and they don't really plan out anything and they don't have a goal in mind for that training session. So their focus is all over the place, and they're really not seeing improvement because, again, they don't really have a goal. They don't know what they're working towards. So it's very important to have a focus, and you do this ahead of time, right? This is going to connect with the fourth point I'm going to be discussing, that is having a journal. But you need to determine what you want ahead of time, and even maybe plan out your training or your practice session, whether it is dry or live fire, catered to that particular goal. Without that, then you're just training blind, and you're probably going to be wasting a lot of your time and your money. If you do have a goal, then you're going to be a lot more effective and efficient and get to your goals faster. The fourth component to an effective training program is to record everything. So I already alluded to this in number 3 when I talked about goals. You want to have a journal or some way to record what you're doing. So you're going to be listing out what you did in that particular training session, whether it is live or dry fire, listing out the date. You could list out the gun that you used, the rounds that you used, but you want to pretty much put everything in there that is going to allow you to evaluate and track your training. So you want to put in what was the good, what was the bad, what drills did you use, what was your accuracy like, what was your speed like. So in line with having a journal, you also want to have a timer or some way to quantify what you're doing in terms of accuracy as well as time. So having that journal is going to go hand in hand with your goals so that you can determine if what you're doing, your performance, each training session is getting you towards your goal or moving you towards your goal. Remember, you can have lots of different goals. It could be the goal for the training session. It can be a weekly goal, a monthly goal, quarterly goal, and a yearly goal. But that journal, when you track your performance, it's going to help you get to those goals. Lastly, if you're working on your shooting and you're by yourself, you absolutely need to film yourself. Filming yourself, you're going to be able to see things after training that you don't notice when you're actually shooting, right, and performing drills and exercises. So set up get a cheap tripod, use your iPhone, whatever camera you have, and record yourself doing that in standard speed, and sometimes do it in slow motion, because slow motion is going to highlight a number of things that you can't see in regular speed. This assumes that you know what you're looking out for. So anytime you get into a training program, if you are just training by yourself, you do need to understand what right looks like and what right feels like. If you don't, then even though you video yourself, you're not going to really know what to look out for. So if you don't know what to look out for, there's 2 things. One is increase your database of skill sets, meaning go to a lot more classes, see what's out there, watch a lot of Tactical Hyve videos to know what right looks like, and so that you have a database to pull from. Or if you have the means, hire a coach, hire an instructor, someone who knows what they're doing to look at you. And you can combine this. For the best combination, what you want to do is have an instructor and also video it. When I train or even bring in people to coach me, I will video the training as well as have them watch me so I can get the best of both worlds, get their immediate input and then watch things later on. So now that we got those points out of the way, which are points that should apply to any effective training or shooting practice program, let's talk about how to develop your own program. This is where things can be a little different though, because we don't know what your skill set is. But let's just assume that you're starting from square one. You don't know where to start. So what I would recommend, and a lot of the instructors I've trained with too, if you have absolutely no baseline, we need to create a baseline. So let's just say that you don't know where to start. You want to pick one of the fundamental areas of shooting. So let's just say we're going to be focusing on grip. And why did we choose grip over trigger control or stance? Well, it's because we have absolutely no baseline. We don't know where to start. Just pick somewhere to start, okay? You could start at stance if you want to. You could start at trigger control, whatever it is. If you are thinking about the general approach to shooting, what they would cover first is probably stance. So maybe start there, but you don't need to, okay? The main thing is just pick something, okay? And then what you're gonna do is you would pick drills that apply to that or work on that specific fundamental. So we were talking about grip, right? That was what I mentioned. So I don't know where to start. Let's just start off with grip. So I am going to take shots. Maybe it is, you could do any number of shots here, okay? You're gonna start off with a baseline where it could be, okay, I wanna look and see if my wrists are locked or if I'm limp wristing and I don't have good recoil management and not managing that muzzle rise. So here, it could be where I'm videoing myself or having a coach or instructor watch me, and maybe I'm doing 3 to 5 shots at a time. From there, you can determine if you're having issues or if you're not. So let's talk about grip, because that's what I first mentioned. So if I was working my grip here, I'm going to check if I'm limp wristing and things like that, and maybe I decide to shoot 3 shots at a time. I'm dry right now, okay? And when I take those shots and I'm doing this live fire, perhaps this is really coming up, and I know that this is not the way it should look. And I'm going to determine that I have that type of performance by watching video or having an instructor tell me. So if I see that when I'm trying to establish a baseline, I know that one of the first things I have to work on is locking my wrist. So now what I would do is I would start to focus on that dry fire. So now every time I do my reps and establish my grip, when I punch out, I am hyper focused on locking my wrist, just really locking it, okay? And I would do this many times, hundreds, thousands of times, dry fire, until I'm very comfortable and confident that I'm locking my wrist. Then, as I alluded to earlier in the video, at this point, that's when I could go live and validate. So maybe I load and make ready, and now I'm gonna take some shots and look at the video again. Are my wrists locked or not? Are they going up? Is there improvement? Record what you see in your journal. But that is kind of a starting point there. You look at what you're doing incorrectly, and those are the areas of deficiency that you want to work on. So that becomes your area of focus. And like I said, there's lots of different approaches here. But what I would recommend and what works for me is I pick one thing and then work on that for at least a week to see improvement, and then move on to something else. A lot of beginners or people who don't really approach training effectively or efficiently, they might work on that at the beginning of a training session, then all of a sudden they're working on something else, and then maybe they don't even go back to the first topic for a long time. So you want to be consistent and dedicated, focused on a particular area until you see marked improvement, then move on. You might be thinking, wow, that's going to take a long time, but that's what it is. Training takes time, it takes reps. And the sooner you understand that, the faster you're going to improve, because you're not going to be changing up your focus. Focus in and then improve. And now let's say I've worked on this just to kind of go with this flow and establishing baseline here. So let's say all of a sudden that first focus was on my wrist to see if I was limp wristing it. Now, if you are watching your video of that practice, and now you see something else. Maybe now you see the wrists are improving, but you're moving really back like this, okay? You see that all the time, and that's recoil management. So now, when you're taking notes, in your journal, you can go, you know what, I spotted, so I'm improving my muzzle, the control of the gun, the muzzle rise with my grip, so that's improving, but I notice now that my recoil management is not working well. I'm moving really far back. And now maybe your next focus for your next training session or the next week is stance. And so now you're going to be, that you've improved your locking of your wrists. Now you're going to be focused on whether I'm moving back or not. And so the idea here is you start off with fundamentals and then add on layers. And the more you watch yourself, right, on video, or you have an instructor watching you, the more you're going to be able to layer things on and see what needs to be improved. So in this particular example, in the video here, we started off with just learning to lock our wrists, and then when you watch yourself, you might be moving back, then you add on, okay, next week I'll focus on stance to manage recoil. Then maybe as you're doing that practice, you see something else stand out. Maybe you're not really aiming well, then now it might be vision and aiming, okay? So that's how it starts. Then it never ends, it's progressive. This, again, goes back to what I mentioned. You do need to know what right looks like, even better, ideally, what right feels like. And this is where expanding your database of knowledge, even though you might not have the experience, but watching videos like on Tactile Hyve, you'll kind of see what right looks like. And if you aren't seeing that, that could be a flag or a signal. Okay, that's what I should focus on in my next training session. All right, so start off with the fundamentals, then add layers. If you already know what you're doing, all right, meaning you have good fundamentals and you kind of been training, you kind of understand this, like focus on what you're not good at, your deficiencies, you already know that, exactly what I talked about, you already know that. This is where now creativity, and there's really no black and white way to approach your training, because you already know about a progressive way to train, you already know how to spot what you're bad at. This is where sky's the limit. But I would still fall back on dry firing first and then validating live. Well, other thing that has helped me is this: if you're already skilled and experienced, and you've been doing a lot of training on your own, you already know to video yourself, so on and so forth, this is where having a fresh pair of eyes, a coach, an outside instructor who is better than you really is helpful, because they are going to be able to spot things that you might not be able to spot by watching your own video. So if you're more experienced, think about that. You don't necessarily have to bring in an instructor to train with them privately. Go to a class and have someone look at you, and that could help get you over a particular plateau. To end this video, I want to briefly talk about something we see all the time. And we see a lot of students, they go to one class or two classes and they think that's the end-all be-all. If you're watching this video, that tells me you want to practice on your own, you want to train on your own, and that is awesome, right? So the idea here is one or two classes are not the end-all be-all. You need to practice on your own. You need to train on your own and do a lot of reps to really improve, to spot all these little things. If you just go to classes and you're not training in between, there's going to be a lot of time where you're not doing anything and you're not honing your skills and even improving your skills. One might even say that you're going to lose the skills because you're not practicing. Also, let's assume you go to classes and you are religiously practicing. That's good. On the flip side, let's say you know that you need to do more than just go to classes and you're practicing in between. Don't think that you don't have to go to any other classes anymore. I already mentioned that for more experienced shooters, having a fresh pair of eyes can really push your training to new levels, because maybe you're going to learn new things, you're going to have an instructor who has a different approach. So continue to go to classes, continue to train on your own, and continue to practice. You need all three to get up there and improve quickly. So that wraps up our video on training and practice. There are lots of different ways to do this and approach training, but I have shared a lot of the commonalities among effective training programs. The main thing is to establish baselines, know what you need to work on, and then just add layers to your training and practice. I hope you guys liked the video. If there's something else that you want to add that could help our viewers train better and more effectively, let us know in the comments, and please like and subscribe. We'll see you guys in the next video.